Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to this Friday Reflections on this, the 1st of May 2025. And for those who are celebrating, happy May Day, although here in the UK we celebrate that on Bank Holiday Monday. Today we would like to continue reading from this book, A Muslim Mystic Community in London, which was written by a secular Turkish professor, Tayfun Atay, during he was basically discussing his research when he was studying here in the UK. And he took as his focus of study Shaykh Nazim's community in London and across the UK. So I started this. This is the second part in this series of podcasts I'm going to be doing on this book. And the reason being is because Professor Tayfun Atay is a secular Turk. He is not someone who is a follower of Maulana Sheikh Nazim. He's not someone who is, ordinarily Sufi oriented or very religious Muslim in that sense. So he is, and he's not antithetic to Muslims either. He is someone who is with an open mind and studying the matter academically. And I think this is useful because it gives a perspective that we wouldn't normally see. Normally, when we learn about our sheikhs, we learn about them from the actual students of the sheikhs themselves uh, and from what the sheikhs themselves produce. We don't normally see from this unique perspective. So I find it valuable, and I hope you do as well. So today we're going to start from page 98 of this book, where the professor discusses his fieldwork. The initial steps. During the rest of the first year, 1990 to 1991, while writing my research report and fieldwork proposal, I made contacts with friends who I had known could help me get in touch with the Sheikh's followers in London. One of them was the Turkish Cypriot murid who had asked me whether I had kissed the Sheikh's hand on my first visit to the Zikr night in Peckham Mosque. My first attempt to enter in the field was in July 1991, when I first broached the idea of doing a study on the Naqshbandi community of Shaykh Nazim with his friend. He welcomed my idea and a week later took me for dinner to the house of a prominent disciple of the Sheikh, a Turkish Cypriot in his early 30s. I explained my position and aim to him and received a positive response. After a friendly conversation on Sufism, Tariqat, the Naqshbandi order, and Shaykh Nazim, he invited me to a zikr ceremony performed by a number of the Turkish murids under his leadership in the Shaykh Nazim Mosque every Monday night. My fieldwork was thus properly inaugurated on the 2nd of August 1991, when I attended the zikr ceremony there for the first time. From then on, I regularly attended the Monday congregations of this subgroup. Soon after, I discovered other zikr gatherings formed by different combinations of murids in different locations. There was a regular meeting in the Peckham Mosque on Thursday nights. This place had the greatest significance for the community members since the Sheikh, when he was in London, led the zikr there every Thursday night. Participants there included murids of various ethnic and national origins. The zikr in Peckham was led by a middle-aged Turkish Cypriot murid who was at the same time a religious scholar graduated from the Faculty of Theology in Ankara. This is an interesting point, of course, because a lot of people sometimes think, under the influence of various other groups of Muslims, that Muslims are not necessarily Sufis are not necessarily so scholarly, and they have this impression that we're just all like spiritual hippies. Whereas, as we see here, as in so many cases, the person who was leading the zikr ceremony was a scholar graduated from the Faculty of Theology in Ankara. So he was someone who was a very well accredited scholar. This mosque was the second place that I started to visit regularly. Thirdly, I was informed about another zikr meeting organized by British Murids in an activity centre in central London, where the congregation was led by a prominent British Murid who was an ex-Jew converted to Islam. This zikr was held on Friday nights. In the early stages of my fieldwork, I visited these three places regularly. Every time I attended a ceremony, I met new people and developed my contacts with those who I had met on previous occasions. Meanwhile, my relations with some Marids improved so much that they voluntarily took me to other circles of their community in London and introduced me to some prominent members of the community. These friends were young Turkish Marids who were more or less at the same age as me. As time went on, I started to get invitations from Marids, women as well as men, to meetings in their houses or on special nights arranged for zikr, Maulid, or Quran recitation. Zikr being Sufi meditation on the names of God, Maulid being the celebration of the birthday of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and obviously Quran recitations. In addition, I regularly attended Friday prayers in the Shaykh Nazim Mosque to meet many of the community members there. After the performance of prayers, I spent time with the Murids and went to their homes or workplaces. Thus, in a couple of months, I was able to estimate how large the network of the community was in and around London. Soon after, my fieldwork schedule expanded with the inclusion of the activities of the Murids of South Asian origins, led by Sheikh Youssef and Sheikh Ali. See pages 69 and 71 of this book. Usually, every Saturday night and often on the Friday and Sunday nights, usually every one or more, sorry, usually every Saturday night and often on Friday and Sunday nights, one or both of them led zikr meetings either in the large communal places such as the spectacular Woking Mosque or in the private houses of Indo-Pakistani Muslims in London. Thus, activities centered around zikr gatherings started to fill my weeks in the fieldwork. It should be recalled at this point that zikr meetings are more than just ritual performances. They are the settings in which the members of the community communicate with each other and sustain their social relations. Therefore, it was through following these meetings that I could best learn about the life of the community. Now, this is an important point. A lot of people, they ask, why do we meet up and do zikr? Well, obviously, we meet up and do zikr. It's one element of it is it's remembering God and it's about personal development and self-purification. But the fact that we come together as a group, it strengthens the community and it does what in Christian communities they call fellowship, where you actually build strong friendships with people within the community and support each other. And some of those ways that you would support each other would be just in your normal day-to-day lives and quite separate from what people would normally consider religious. And this is important because this social framework within any community is vital to that community's well-being and for its resilience and growth and development. Early difficulties and worries. At this stage, the basic difficulty for me was a practical one, which in fact continued until the very end. And that was that the pulse of the community beat at night. Since the zikr meetings lasted nearly until midnight, and I did not have a car, traveling in and around London became a major problem for me. Sometimes I came back home towards the early morning. Meanwhile, I had started to go to the morning prayers, Sabah Namazi, in Arabic Fajr, which a number of Turkish Murids perform together once a week in a young Turkish Murid's house in Manor House, North London. To get there, I had to leave home at 3:30 a.m. to join their prayers and the ensuing breakfast and the lively discussion. At this early stage, I was less busy during the day although I gradually started to increase my daytime activities by meeting murids, arranging family visits with my wife and baby daughter, or to the houses of married murids and making surprise visits to the murids' workplaces. Otherwise, I was occupied during the day with writing down my observations about and impressions of the long and tiring previous nights. The first part of my fieldwork lasted from the beginning until the Sheikh's arrival in London in March 1992. This was for a period of adjustment to the life of the Naqshbandis in London. For me to become a participant observer within this basically religious community, I needed some experience in Islamic religious practice. Knowing nearly nothing before, I spent several weeks reading some guidebooks to Islamic practices of worship and training myself in the basic rules, such as how to do ablutions, how to perform prayers, and how to conduct myself in a religious atmosphere. Now, this is interesting, of course, because Professor Tayfun is Turkish. People have assumptions that people who are born into predominantly Muslim communities are all religious and know their religion well. Of course, this varies. There are those that do, and there are those that don't. And this doesn't necessarily mean they are a particularly good or particularly bad person. It's just how religious a person is. And I know we have guidelines on Islam and on what we should and what we shouldn't do. But if people don't know, and people vary on an individual basis, and we have to have understanding for that, and not push people more than what they are willing to go. So, and also there is a guideline within fiqh that if people aren't like causing trouble within society, there's no reason to trouble them. So it's like if a person isn't particularly religious, as long as they are not causing trouble within society, even in a very Muslim society, they should be left alone. They shouldn't be bothered because of that. It's something that sadly you do get Muslims today and also at other times where that have got this wrong, and they have put pressure on these people, or constantly guilt trip them and stuff. And this is not something which is unique to Islam, of course. You find the same in other religious communities, but it is something that we need to be on guard about and realize that religion, whether people are Muslims or of another faith, that religion has to come from themselves. It cannot be something which we push upon them, because that will, that as soon as they can put it down, they'll put it down. And even Maulana Shaykh Nazim says this for his own murids in the Wazifa book that I have. He says towards the end that a person's devotions should be like a well-fitting clothing. It should be something that's easy to carry. Otherwise, if it's something that's heavy and burdensome, then the person will put it down as soon as they're able. Well, this is what Maulana Sheikh Nazim said. So, this is something that is a principle well rooted within Islam. Now, of course, when someone is they've really got their heart in it and they love their faith and they're practicing it, they will do more. It will come naturally. But you can't push that upon anyone. So, going back to the book, Professor Typhon, he was a secular Turk who wasn't particularly religious. He was probably nominally Muslim, but he wasn't really practicing. So he didn't know about the religion and what to practice, and had to research this before he could actually do his fieldwork within the community. So, as he said here, he spent several weeks reading some guidebooks on the basic practices of Islam and how to perform prayers and conduct himself in a religious atmosphere. And he said, besides that, I memorized particular Quranic verses which were chanted during the prayers and ceremonies. I had to recognize my life and that some of my, sorry, I had to recognize my life and that of my family according to the requirements of this new world, which I intended to observe and investigate. This period was not an easy one. Feelings of frustration pervaded it. Nothing, however, was more frustrating for me than the following incident. One night, I was invited to a meeting of my Monday group, the young Turkish Murids, whose zikr gatherings I had attended first in Shaykh Nazim Mosque, at the house of their leader. The reason for the meeting was that the two Turkish Muslims from Macedonia had come to ask for help for the dreadful situations of Muslims in Albania. One of them was of Albanian origin. They specified that what they needed was food and books on Islam rather than money, since there was much Christian missionary activity, both Catholic and Orthodox, after the collapse of the communist regime in the country, in which the majority of the people, 78% of them, were Muslim. After a long discussion after what should be done, a Turkish murid suggested calling the London Correspondent of Turkey, a moderate Islamic newspaper published daily in Turkey and available in London, to come and investigate the two guests, to interview the two guests. In this way, the voice and desperate situation of Albanian Muslims would reach a wider audience. Though it was very late, the correspondent came and interviewed them, recording what the guests said about Albania. After the interview, the correspondent posed for a picture with the two Macedonians, intending to use it in the paper, and then suggested taking a photograph of everybody present there with the guests as a souvenir. While everybody posed for the picture, I chose to stay aside. But when one of the Murids asked me to join them, I had to comply. A couple of weeks later, this picture appeared in the second page of the newspaper in Turkey. My first reaction was regret. I worried that if the picture was seen by people who knew me in Turkey, my family, relations, and friends, they might think that I'd gone religious or converted and become a member of an Islamic community. I was certain that none of them would realize it was part of my field research. Next day, I rushed to my supervisor to tell him what had happened and ask his advice on what to do. When he saw the picture in the paper, far from showing any sign of uneasiness, he reacted cheerfully and said, "Well, it seems that your fieldwork is going very well." These words were enough to remind me that I was in a completely different setting where worries stemming from my cultural background and particular social and historical circumstances of my country would not make any sense. I felt reassured, but also a little embarrassed, since my anxiety had been perhaps unreasonable. I left to worry about it. Also, no one I knew in Turkey ever did notice the picture. Now, I think this is an interesting point on so many different levels because, and you get this with people in the community and also within our tariqa as well. The We assume certain things, certain behaviors from people. We expect that they will react in certain ways. And it's like, here, why not join in and take part in the photograph? But not realizing that everybody has their own particular background, their own particular concerns and worries. And if people come from particular communities initially, whether they be converts to Islam, I mean, separate from this guy's fieldwork, but he raises an important point. Separate to that, I mean, it's like whether they be converts or whether they be people from other countries abroad, they may have particular concerns and worries that we're not aware of. So we shouldn't expect them to behave in exactly the same way and take it wrong if perhaps they do not want to take part in a photograph or don't want to be seen in particular contexts, or we don't know what they're worried about. In this particular case, no one saw the photograph, and Professor Tayfun was okay. But what if he had come from, let's say, a country like Iran, and being seen in a particular setting could have put his family really seriously at risk back home? And whether that person happened to be a convert or whether that person happened to just be from another country, um, we have to always be aware that people will have their own background and concerns, and not everybody's coming to the table in exactly the same way. Um, it's an interesting point you raised here. And there was in highlighting the fact that there was that social pressure within the group to take that photograph. Now he discusses his first meeting with Maulana Shaykh Nazim. The Sheikh. The Sheikh came to London in early March 1992, just before the beginning of Ramadan. I was with a large party of Marids at Heathrow Airport to welcome him. After a long and impatient wait, we saw the Sheikh and his wife emerge from the customs hall. Cheering with love for their Sheikh, the Marids, both men and women, rushed towards him trying to kiss his hands and welcome him and his wife. This emotional reunion of the Master and his disciples caused some confusion in the terminal. Then the sheikh directed the crowd around him towards a particular corner of the terminal hall to perform the late afternoon prayer, ikindi namasi, or in Arabic, asa, without further delay. There, with around 50 people, including me behind him, the sheikh performed his first daily prayer in London. In fact, I was not at all unfamiliar with such a picture since it had been recently since it had recently become quite common in Turkey, as in many other Muslim countries, to see the people performing their prayers, particularly their Friday prayers, in public places outside of mosques. I noticed, however, that there was a fundamental difference between the two cases. In Turkey, such a situation would create a tense tension due to the feelings of animosity between the performers, who were usually in a threatening mood, and the passers-by, who would glare at them with dislike, whereas the performance at Heathrow seemed to be more sincere and inoffensive. While the people around, though surprised at what they saw, and watched the prayers of these multicolored people with interest rather than hostility. For sure, these were the days long before the arrival of Islamophobia to Western countries, including Britain, following the terrible 9/11. The 3 months of the Sheikh's stay in London constituting the most intensive and difficult part of my fieldwork. Throughout this period, I tried to follow the Sheikh everywhere, day and night. I was able to conduct one extended structured interview with him. More importantly, at his request, I had the privilege of joining him together with a number of others on his journey to Scotland through major cities of Britain such as Leicester, Sheffield, Newcastle, Manchester, and Birmingham. The Sheikh and I. My first personal contact with the Sheikh was at the airport terminal when I found him just in front of me while I was trying to take some pictures of his reunion with his followers. Like the others, I kissed his hand and said welcome, getting the response thanks. This was followed by the attempts of some of the murids to introduce me to him hurriedly, a student from Turkey who was doing a research on Sufism, to which he said, okay, let him do it. Our first proper encounter, however, came at his residence, and at a very inconvenient time, after the performance of a long morning prayer at around 6 a.m. It gave me the worst and most painful experience, not only of my field work, but without exaggeration, of my life. It also left me for a time uncertain as to whether or not I should continue the field work or leave it, since my feelings of humiliation and fear seemed unbearable. It was, in a way, a harsh realization for me as a researcher outsider of the power over me of the community and the sheikh, and of my weak and inferior position before them. After the prayers were over, the sheikh started to chat with the murids, most of whom were Turkish. Then he recognized me and asked me what kind of study I was doing on Sufism. I replied that I intended to write a doctoral thesis. Thereupon, the Sheikh asked me whether I could find enough written sources on the subject in the libraries here in London. I pointed out the library of my school, SOAS, was very rich in sources on Islam, and then he asked me whether I knew Arabic or Old Ottoman Turkish. As soon as I answered no, he burst out, shame on you. He said, he does not know Arabic or Ottoman. He does not know English either, but he wishes to study Tasawwuf. I was struck dumb. He continued by attacking the present secular Turkish regime, of which I personally represented at that terrible moment. Uh, this is a quote from Maulana Shaykh Nazim and in that time. This shameless, corrupt Turkey has done what no country of unbelievers did to Islam. They are sending him, that's the Tayfun here, to the West to study Islam. He knows neither Old Turkish, Ottoman, nor Arabic, but he studies to solve. He will learn some distorted things from the Yehudi, then write down some nonsense, and he will be Dr. Tayfun. It is all harm. It is all to harm Islam. A Turkish murid came in at that point and made everything much worse for me, something which I had never expected from him. He told the Sheikh, you are right, sir. I met someone like him in Manchester. I was quarreling with him every day. I was devastated. There was no hope of support from the Murids, whom I knew and with whom I was on good terms. The Sheikh continued his bitter words, making me the scapegoat for all the Turkish regime's anti-Islamic policies. Staring at me and frowning, he asked, "Is this Britain an Islamic country? How can you study and learn about Islam here? Instead, you should have gone to Islamic places like Damascus." Every time I attempted to produce an explanation for these angry and hostile questions, he made the things worse. I lost all my self-confidence. All he wanted was just not to be there. The Sheikh's questions and scathing comments continued unbearably until he asked me how long I'd been in London. When I told him nearly 3 years, he was surprised. He said that he thought that I'd recently arrived. He sarcastically congratulated me on finding them at least after 3 years. At that moment, another young Turkish murid, probably worried about having accepted me into their gathering after the Sheikh's disapproval of me, said that I had met them recently too. He also mentioned the name of the murid who had introduced us, whose father was one of the Sheikh's distinguished murids in Cyprus. Then the Sheikh turned to me and looked at me in his eyes, asking how I had met him. This was my chance to talk after all these terrible moments of denigration. I told the Sheikh that I had met the murid 2 years ago when I first attended a zikr ceremony by him in Peckham. I emphasized how I'd become fascinated with what I saw there and decided to learn more about him as a Naqshbandi Sheikh and his community in London. This was why I was here in a Western country to study the subject related to Islam. Indeed, it was a fact, I went on to state, that throughout history, Islam had spread mostly by means of the Sufi orders and the Sufi sheikhs. This seemed to me still the case today, for it was Sufism that brought most Western converts to Islam. What I saw in Peckham 2 years ago had demonstrated this to me and stimulated my interest in Islam in the West in general, and in his position and the activities of the community in London in particular. I also pointed out that I appreciated his point that I was handicapped in not knowing Arabic and Ottoman Turkish. However, this was also one of my reasons for studying a contemporary Muslim community such as his, rather than making a historically oriented study. In any case, I had been very sorry to bother him and the others. With these words, I finished. The Sheikh seemed to be impressed with what I had told him. First, he said that he was ready to help me if I had prepared the questions. He added that he liked the way I looked at the issue of tasawwuf and the tariqah in Islam, pointing out that these ideas were not held even by the principal religious authorities in Turkey, such as the Directorate of Religious Affairs. He congratulated me on thinking in this way, and as a response, I thanked him and kissed his hand. That was the end of a long and nerve-wracking conversation. Soon the Sheikh asked everyone who had come for the prayer to leave and have some rest. I left with the others. When I came home, I was feeling mentally and emotionally destroyed. The dominant image in my mind was my speechless, helpless, and pitiful position in front of the Sheikh and the Marids. There was no way, I thought, that I would continue the field work. It took time for me to control these feelings and realize the most important result of this distressing experience, which was that I had survived. No matter how ashamed I was, the Sheikh in the end had welcomed me and promised to help. It could have been much worse. After those offensive remarks, he could have sent me away and asked me not to appear again. This had not happened. In the end, I had made my point. So I buried my injuries inside me and prepared for the adventure of the next day in the field. I think I'll leave it there. That's at the beginning of page 105. And this is why I think it's an interesting thing to read. The book I'm reading, for those who don't know, it's something you really have to look in academic bookshops and stuff to find this book, because it's based on a postgraduate thesis, a Muslim mystic community in Britain. Uh, so meaning the West and for the West. And this is by Professor Tayfun Atay. It's a book published based upon his postgraduate thesis. And it is interesting, like I said, because it's coming from a very different perspective. Now, I'm a student of Maulana Shaykh Nazim and Maulana Shaykh Hisham. Um, how I see the Sheikhs is obviously a different way to how Professor Typhon does. And his sort of, the way he came at it from a secular perspective, but with fairness. it sheds a light and an interesting perspective we wouldn't see otherwise. And there's loads of little anecdotes and bits of information in this account which I wouldn't have known otherwise. So I think it's valuable, and I hope you find it useful as well. And I will continue next time. I hope you all have a wonderful Juma Mubarak tomorrow, a blessed Friday, and a wonderful weekend. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of God be with you all.